Stories and Cures, the Experience of Illness and the Arts of Medicine. This is a research project led by Joanna Geyer Kordesch and based here at the Scottish Storytelling Centre in the heart of historic Edinburgh. And many of the ideas and influences affecting European medicine have a link or association here in this city. We were just approaching the culmination of the project, a series of seminars and presentations at the Scottish International Storytelling Festival. When the day before the festival was due to begin, Joanna Geyer Kordesch suffered a massive stroke. Suddenly, the two themes of the project, the experience and the medicine, came together in a very challenging and personal way for the person leading our research.
Well, first of all, I'm slowly recouping my strength. That is one of the worst things about stroke, is how long it takes for you to come from a near-dead position to something which is approaching normality. And it took me since beginning November to become stronger, and I still have a long way to go. Because stroke, as they say, is an individualized, I call it a condition, not a disease. So that is primarily the situation I'm in. It is individualized. That means, first of all, that the doctors can't tell you anything about the prognosis. You have to put it together yourself. And I'd like to say, while I'm still on this topic of doctors and no prognosis, that you are a complete person. The stroke hit me as half disablement. That means the whole right side has no feelings, although in my case it has movement. And this waiting for parts of your body to become normal again is an individualized, personalized experience. And people are loath to say what will happen to you. And so you're struck into a kind of experiential position, which is very important. And I would recommend anyone having a disease to look once more at the experience of disease rather than the drugs and the prognosis and any advice that you get from the outside world.
To recede into that deep shell, the convolutions of it, its darkness, the coruscating empty silence, ambivalent echoes calling chamber to chamber, then the heartbeat, ecstatic, wild, gathering rhythm as if, tone upon tone, the Liberty Bell tolls in the mind, never having to fix the meaning, deep bell body resounding, clapper upon the brass, a summons.
Well, there are lots of things that you find you can't do, and luckily my mind is thoroughly intact, but my right-hand side is not, which I use to write with and to take notes with. And so I could no longer have a note on anything, really. And I trained my left hand to write, and it took at least 3 months before that was legible. And I was very, very pleased that when I got letters back from my handwritten letters with my left hand, that their own replies were worse to read than my right hand. And so I was very pleased at the amount of work I had put into making my left hand legible, because other people's right hands certainly were not. And I also had difficulty with reading. That is, I think, the very worst thing for people in my position, that they can no longer read academic books, which are all in 12-point, and there are so few books in audio mode, and you cannot keep up with anything. I am going to try to enlarge things over the computer. But the computer itself has its commands in 12-point, and I found that really, really difficult. And also because of your immense tiredness, that you can stay awake maybe and work maybe 3 or 4 hours, and after that you become really tired, and you cannot keep up the amount of work that we're used to. But I would say, before you go on with that, I would say that you stop being competitive and you stop being commercial and you start again with the experience of life as adding much more to you and to your way of living than is normal.
The popular story of medicine is that we simply got better at fixing our bodies, as if we were recalcitrant machines which could be made to work better. Joanna's research shows a different picture, much richer, more complex, in which many cultural and philosophical influences are at play. Many different understandings of the way mind and body and spirit interact with each other have been important. Also, there's an issue of gender. For women as patients were treated differently. And in addition, women were excluded from the profession of medicine. Yet in reality, as Joanna shows, some key women thinkers showed that they were pioneers and had an original contribution to make.
As a woman, I had to jump from one university to the next because I'm bilingual, and both the German and the English did not know each other's language. So you either wrote in German or you wrote in English, but you didn't mix the two very much. And I went between the countries, and I had the nice experience of going to Cambridge and to Oxford, and both in the medical history departments. And they were quite exciting to drift between the old buildings and the archives, which you knew would deliver medical history material, and educating the public about Georg Ernst Stahl, which was my main, he died in 1734, and he was my main object at the time. And he advocated a body-soul unity. And this was my most important aspect of delivery. That here was a doctor of the 18th century, when everyone was in the Enlightenment, who did not say it was just physical, and it was just chemistry, or it was all physiology, or it was all anatomy, but here he was trying to fit in the imagination, the feelings, and what you generally term as soul. A soul covers everything but the rational. And he said that ratiocinnationes was thinking in little bits, and he would like to think as a whole and as an organic doctor. And I think we've quite lost sight of that. And I think my experience as a disabled person will tell you that you are made of hands and feet and eyes and sides, and if your whole right side is paralyzed, you have to deal with the whole right side. You cannot just take the eyes or the hands or the feet separately. And that is what I'm afraid doctors generally do these days. They're specialized, and the patient is not.
Persephone has hair like dark brown ferns. She lies sleeping, the same above as below, say the mirror waters, roots spidery, tendrils of hair, enwrapping clay, the crumbled darkness, metamorphic, stone, sand, old leaves, sap shooting up. Her body is every shade there is in the tentacles of earth, bone to bone, nerve endings, soles of feet, thighs to hip, torso, breasts, and her abundant hair framing her radiant face as she moves, hands outstretched, spinning, embroidering, sewing, spreading her warmth, the tiny fingers of flowers, the small swelling of buds, the earthling frogs and toads lurching to the ponds, the chorus that greets the sun rising.
Women were in the 18th, particularly in the 19th, restricted. And I think they were very clever in how they got out of this particular confinement. And it wasn't just through children. It was through inventing novels and through the social life they led and through some remarks they made as to who could come in the boudoir and who could not. And they kept their own restrictions on other people as well. So it wasn't quite as undemanding as you think. And they did come out as mavericks some of the time. I think Catherine Crowe, for example, who divorced her husband and lived for her son, but in the meantime produced an enormous amount of novels and quite insightful and also scientifically based spiritualist or spirit-based books, was quite a model for some of the women, although she was considered to be somewhat of a strange being by others. Charles Dickens, for example, didn't like her, but he was trying on his own to incorporate his ghosts in a more socially relevant, does it have to be socially relevant? Socially relevant way. And she was not. She was looking at ghosts in their manifestations to the living, and the manifestation to the living lets you learn something. Medical history is much more complicated than you would think of today. It goes back all the way to joining body and mind. And that is the one thing that people avoid today, is to talk about your mind. Now, I suggested when I was in hospital that we look back on our experience as well, and to look at the dreams we had, which are very vibrant when you're near death. And they discount this, except for psychology. But psychology today is mainly drugs. And what you really want to do is to go back and to think of how the Romantics, which are viewed as someone way out there, but the Romantics really thought about the imagination, the dreams, whatever other night side of nature comes up in yourself. And we are no different today than we were in the 18th century, because we still have a spirit and we still have a physical side. And the physical side is much, much simpler in a way, because you describe your nerve endings, you describe where your muscles meet up, you describe how to agitate this muscle or that muscle through electricity, and you leave aside things like the yellow wallpaper, where women were confined to bed until they were somewhat better. Well, what is better?
In the night sky, the great bones of the stars are the bones of your wings divining the cosmos. The flight is silent, engaged, concentrated. Words cannot express that gliding power. It turns with the ecliptic of the zodiac, the recurring year. Human fates are extraneous, mere ticking energies, joys and woes like conversations held yesterday, already written into the stars, the winking ones, the tiddly ones, the ones rolled as dice for the fates. Not you, Cassiopeia, aloof and sailing the night winds of the universe.
The women in science that count in this way, there are women who wrote, it was the only way that was open to them. They wrote lots of novels and depicted a lot of their problems in these novels, which is astounding, but they were denigrated for writing things which pleased. And There are women in the 19th century who went the way of science. I'm particularly concerned with the doctors, of course, and that was Elizabeth Blackwell, first of all. She was American and she came over here. But there's also a lot of women working hard in Edinburgh. There was Sophia Ducks-Blake, who tends to be washed away in front of Inglis, who is the one that's celebrated. But Sophia Ducks-Blake is a particular hero of mine. She was defeated through Dr. Christie here at Edinburgh University. The women could study, but they could not get degrees. Isn't that funny? And the Sophia Ducks-Blake set up in Brunsfield one of her own clinics for women and children. And I think that's very, very important. But she got her degree as an MD and was put on the medical register as a woman who went to Bern, Switzerland, because Christie wouldn't let her earn her degree in Edinburgh. But I think he was defeated in the fight which he won.
We all experience illness, yet we're the same people who live in the natural world, who dream, who imagine. Now, Joanna herself, under the name Patterson, her married name, writes and paints. And I think this gives her a particular insight into that context in which medicine was practiced, the creative context.
I have taken up the creative side and the poetic side and the telling of tales and the storyteller side. And I think that that is a much more creative and much more visual or imaginative side of yourself than adding in everybody else's work and trying to find one avenue that they haven't discovered. In this way, you find your own voice and you imagine the people of the past. I put lots and lots of ghosts in my story because I believe that people in the past are actually speaking to you in your own imagination. And that's one of the things I very, very strongly go for in these tales. They're not changes of life or anything. They're observations. And I think that's the more common ground that you have, because when you tell people you've noticed flowers or the way they bloom in summer or when they bloom in summer or how your garden has worked or anything of that nature, it doesn't mean you have to change yourself entirely. It means that you become much, much more attentive to the outside world.
Sighting the star along the notched gap by the cairns, the one brightest on the horizon, sign the season is turning, under the cupola, the winter's divinatory vellum, I watch the stars elliptical repeat, their epiphany. The sidereal quality of light a spark in the mind, the frumped wing of the exercise of training the hand in dexterity, the violin creating the vibrations, interval and return, the catgut translating efforts of fingering, birth of chord upon chord upon chord of intrepid intensity, inlaid, then the single note, alone, travelling the night spaces.
Well, I love the idea of place. I know that Donald wrote a book on Arthur's Seat, which I just perfectly devoured. And that was very good because place always makes the transient people feel that they know where they are. And I think that's totally important.
Waking after a night of rain falling, and now the sun just rising, just over the rim, over those hills on the horizon, a golden dawn in which the silver sable rain hangs still, a veil under drumming clouds, decamping but draping the sap-rich birches with translucent synapses of electric sparks shaking into the fine hair of red and indigo, arbours combed with blue light, the that the bird disturbs as its white flashes ascend, its fall of notes reading the birch's quavering music.
Both men and women took journals much more than they do today as a record of their own internal spiritual life, and they kept them. And we were very lucky to be able to read them. They deposited them in the right archives, and I think their progeny deposited it in the right places. So we are privileged to learn the unreworked areas of life that you had in the 19th century. And they very much go into the depression as well as the highlights of life. And I think that's very important, because if you think about it, we are not just healthy, wonderful people. We have a kind of depression now and again, and it's worth looking at those. And they are best recorded in diaries or journals or any other personal item, even letters between intimate friends, which are very, very important. And in the 19th century, men and women tended to put their whole soul in a letter, whereas we tend to censor it now, or we become awfully passive in front of television or any of the other media, which don't really engage our own creative side.
Persephone's gown gathers with the ritual beat of Demeter's dance steps, circling sunfire falling, sweet breezes delighting, the snow hag lifting her skirts, and because it is spring, Persephone rises from below to be above, and the mirror waters slide into the sea tides, and the tree candelabras the sun, dancing north, her face now bright, the arc resplendent, unshackling the underworld's hold.
I don't think you could live in Edinburgh without knowing that it was volcanic. And I don't think you could look about you without seeing Arthur's Seats, or with any of the spines that lead up to the castle, the High Street, or being unaware of the Netherbow gate to the inner circle of what was Edinburgh a long time ago. I don't think you can discount your own environment without learning a little bit more about it. And I think the most important part of learning that is stories. Not necessarily history, because that's so cleansed, but stories which bring in the demons and the good sides of whatever happened. And it happened a long, long time. Not ago, but it happened a long, long time before your brief existence. Look at light. I try to evoke light in both my poems and in tales that I write, and your shadow is one element of you that moves with the sun, and sometimes it's an element that moves with the moon, and you don't really look at it, do you? And you don't know what your strange self in this elongated, narrow, black thing which accompanies you all the time really means for you. And I think you should invest it with some of your imagination.
The dark of the moon. Stars are solitudes, spaces travelled and denied in sumptuous hours and laid aside like jewels at night. Their birth is blackness, in the moon-dark opalescent silence, when, spat by dragons, they travelled decaying light years in that twinkling, blinking of seconds that falls on us, while they move across the firmament, bejewelled afterthoughts that burn unconscious in us, night after night in our sleep, striking desires from the soul's flint. Their passage is brilliant, among shadows shaded to a velvet monochrome, when in the garden the golden-pointed firs quiver as the house of night opens its windows to the wind. The raven passing quickly, night feathers singed black, both scapulars wide, wing tips flayed, flying through the starlight spectacle while she seeks the smoke hole in the cold night of our ashen age to feed back the stolen moon for us to touch when we dream.
I think this reading into the past, not the present, but the past, is a very valuable thing because it confronts you with things in nature and things in your physical environment which you normally do not see at all. And I think this ability to see means going back into books that you would not normally pick up as immediately concerning you. I think your storytelling is very well connected with your well-being as human beings, because if you didn't realize your own story and the story of others in all of its uncleansed and lovely night-side type of sayings to you, you would be a poor, much poorer person.
Having had the privilege of working with Joanna through this project, I feel that she herself is a pioneer in that great tradition. She has pursued her research with originality and considerable courage, and now that she herself has faced an experience of severe illness and of disability, she has carried her ideas, her thinking, boldly into that space as well.
They opened up, different people opened up about their different experience. And I think that's very important because you never will be able to pull it over one of these 5 people said, and 500 people said, and 5,000 people said. Individualized experience is something you have to cope with. And you have to enable people. You have to give them the chance to express their own emotions and their own way of coping with illness and with their own life even if they're not badly disabled. You have to give them the attention necessary that you would think about in a letter or in any other kind of personal journal. You should share that with people that you trust. Through this project, we had people relay their own diseases, whatever they were, and their own inhibitions, and we even had people who had been through mental distress express just how they were feeling. And you listened to this, and they were quite jaunty and expressive and emotional about what they had experienced themselves. And this project gave them the chance to, from the patient side, to express what they really experienced as illness, as apart from something that gives you the drug to make the symptoms milder. You have to have the courage to face your symptoms. The idea of progress is that you're always going to find more and more solutions. But I'm of the opinion that you can think about where you are rather than the solution, and this will give you a kind of entree to a long-term history which will relativize your modern quest for complete health. And I remember reading about a woman who was confined through her illness for 9 months and maybe even longer. And she had to live with this, and so did a lot of other people in this age when diseases were part of nature. They were not part of just getting the right medication to come out of it. And I think that adds very much to your experience, and the doctors and the nurses which were there were quite relieved, actually, to see that someone was stressing the point that you have to live through the disease rather than just eliminate it. It liberated people to talk about their experience, and it liberated doctors from becoming gurus of the science, and it liberated the patients to achieve an exchange and to get information. And I think that that's very helpful.
To recede into that deep shell, the convolutions of it, its darkness, the coruscating, empty silence, ambivalent echoes calling, chamber to chamber, then the heartbeat, ecstatic, wild, gathering rhythm, as if, tone upon tone, the liberty bell tolls in the mind, never having to fix the meaning, deep bell body, resounding, clapper upon the brass.
A summons. The death knell of the outer self, the resurgence of the inner self. Needing no eyes, familiar with darkness, visions and ghosts. The shadowy kelp, the rib bones of the wreck. Upon it the periwinkles, miniature stars, shining under water, self-sufficient.